Hello again. Hi, everyone. We're back. Yes.
We're here.
You guys look the same as you did just
Switch
seconds ago.
seats.
I don't know if we are that quick, especially you.
No, absolutely. Lost my step.
It has been a fun day. We appreciate everyone tuning in. We've been sent some questions, so let's get right into it. I like it. Rob has got his finger on the trigger there.
Well,
Boom. Doesn't want any dilly-dallying. Doesn't want any chit-chatting.
He's ready
going
for lunch.
straight. He's going straight to the first question of the day, and here it is. Has an MMA fight ever made you emotional, even cried? Somehow DJ versus Cruz made me feel very sad. Have you ever felt so emotional, maybe even cried, while watching a fight?
I don't know about crying, but I do really, I remember, and this is still stuck in my mind, I believe it was when Valerie Letourneau fought Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Okay.
And Joe Rogan's interviewing after the fight, and she was all beat up and scars everywhere. And I forgot what he asked her, but I just remember her saying, I tried so hard, you know? And then she started crying, and she hugs Joe Rogan. And
Really? Wow.
And
You got emotional.
Yeah, a little bit. I was like,
I
oh,
like
you
it.
know, it kind of felt, you know, because we forget, like, you know, we always know there's a winner and a loser, but we forget that, you know, these people put everything on the line. They invest months. You know, this was her whole career leading up to this moment. She gave it her all, you know, did everything she could possibly do in her training and her diet, everything. This moment came up, and she just simply was not, you know, the better fighter that night and came up short, and, you know, that has to burn.
I like that one.
Yeah, for me, it's always after the fight. It is during that interview. I think that the ones that I'm remembering, that one that sort of choked me up was when Cody Garbrandt won the belt and had the little kid that he gave he sort of presented the belt to. He wasn't just like letting him, I thought he was just
Maddox
letting him,
Maple.
holding him. Yes, he gave him that belt, which is like, and that, I was just watching that and I was like, wow, that was an emotional moment. And I think that was one moment of triumph. One of the ones that I remember that was the opposite was when Chris Weidman lost his belt, and his dad was in there. He's like, he's still my boy.
Yes.
And when I mean, even just hearing that now, I get chills just seeing, you know, Chris's dad saying that, and just imagining, you know, all of us can just relate to that. I mean, certainly as a parent, if you know, when I watch my son or daughter do something and either triumph or not triumph, I live with them. I live in that experience with them. And so here was Chris Weidman's dad taking the loss and trying to twist it into something that was, you know, to try to give his son a positive moment within that despair. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Man, I feel like there's one of these every week for me, you know, especially with the post-fight interviews, and you get emotionally invested, you start to know these individuals. And Cormier losing to Jones and him crying on television was tough. Even the first time that he lost and him crying at the press conference. Weidman beating Anderson Silva, you know, just months removed from Hurricane Sandy and everything he's been through. You know, I felt emotional for him. One that really comes to mind is, so we used to do a lot of the locker room interviews, and we were in Nashville in April of 2010 when King Mohammed Lawal beat Gegard Mousasi and became the Strikeforce champion. It's one of my favorite post-fight interviews because he couldn't stand. He had won the fight, he won the belt, but he couldn't stand, King Mo. And so they let us go into his locker room, and he's lying down and he's wearing sunglasses, and the belt is just kind of draped on his stomach. And, you know, he starts crying right away in the interview, and he's saying, you know, I've tried so hard my whole career. I've tried to win national championships. I tried to make it to the Olympics, and I finally got it. I finally got the belt. And, you know, for them to let us in there and to talk to him, and he's emotional, and you have to kind of try to let things, you know, you don't want to be disrespectful to his emotions, but also ask certain questions, but also get out and not stay too long. That's one I'll never forget. One that I think that we're going to resurface in the next couple of days on our social media, speaking to Donald Cerrone after his UFC debut, he beat Paul Kelly, and it's kind of interesting. He's fighting a Liverpudlian on Saturday, or a Pudlian, I should say, Darren Till. So we interview him in the hallway, and he starts crying because his grandfather just passed away. And so there's moments like that definitely make me emotional.
Now that we're like talking about this, now so many moments are coming.
Exactly.
MMA is full of moments. BJ Penn, I believe it was like one of the very first times. I guess he retired. I believe it was after the Frankie Edgar fight, and he was at the press conference, and he's like, I just don't have it in me anymore. And he was very honest with the media and started crying. And I remember I was watching that from home, and like, you know, people started clapping, and you know, sort of the end of the career. He, of course, did end up coming back. One recently, Junior Albini, you know, after he made his UFC debut, he was explaining to us, you know, after the fight, you know, in the post-fight scrum in Long Island, that he didn't have any money to buy his daughter any toys, and she would just play with shampoo bottles. And I don't have any kids, and I still, you know, got choked up a little bit.
This is a sport where the men and women who compete are trained to and have to be really hard. And then the moments when they become soft, it almost becomes more emotional because of how hard they have been through that entire fight, and all of a sudden you just see them soften right before your eyes. And it's something that always affects me.
Great first question. Let's move along now to our second. Dana said Johnny Bone Jones equals biggest waste of talent in sport. We spoke about that earlier. Which other fighters frustrated you because they couldn't make the best of their skill set? I'll go first here. There was one fighter that I think we had a lot of high hopes for, and he actually was booked in a fight for December against Jordan Meehan, Eric Silva. I think a lot of us thought that Eric Silva would turn into, you know, he had the look, he had the great debut, some quick finishes, and never materialized, and had some real stinkers, and then would come back and have some great fights. And so I feel like Eric Silva, who knows, he can turn it around. It's one of those guys that comes to mind when I think of, I had higher hopes for him.
Boy, I can't really think of a name. What occurs to me, though, is that I think sometimes we were talking earlier about promotion, and sometimes the promotion gets ahead of the fighter in a sense. And I think that, you know, even like Eric Silva may have just been as good as he was going to be. It may have been that it was all about the way he was promoted, the way he was hyped, the way he had maybe one performance that made people think more of him than he really was. So I really can't think of somebody who, I mean, I think of in sports, there are certainly people, you know, tons of top first-round draft picks in the NFL who just never panned out. I look at MMA, and I'm just amazed at some of the people that could just rise to the sport on their own. So I tend to find myself being overwhelmed by how people overachieve as opposed to underachieve.
Yeah, no, and look, I don't want to compare Eric Silva's trials and tribulations to that of John Jones. I'm talking about someone who we had high hopes for and maybe didn't pan out. It's a little bit different and a bit of a stretch. Perhaps another one is a Roger Huerta that I think a lot of people thought would be a big star. He was on
Cover
Sports Illustrated, all that stuff, and didn't really materialize into much. Anyone come to mind for you, Danny?
I'm trying to think right now. And I say this, you know, with an asterisk, but maybe a little bit, perhaps Dominic Cruz. You know, obviously he achieved great things, and he's still achieving great things, and he can very well win the title. But man, he truly was at the very best before having those injuries. He had 2 back-to-back, kept him out for a while, kept him out, you know, of a good portion of his 20s. And I think again, we talk about DJ and the whole title run. There was a point where there was a clear gap between Dominic Cruz and everyone else. And I think he could have, you know, if healthy, he could have gone and really pushed that title defense record and maybe been a threat there.
I mean, I think that when we talk about this kind of thing, there is such a thin line. I mean, you mentioned DJ. Well, DJ's biggest foil, Joseph Benavidez, you know, I still would argue that 125-pound division was kind of made for Benavidez because he was such a dominant fighter, even when he was fighting up at 135. And now he goes down there and they make this division for him, and he loses the initial title fight to Demetrius Johnson by a split decision. And even when that happened, I remember thinking, well, he's probably going to come back and, you know, he'll get another shot and he'll take it. Well, he never did. He hasn't. Now, but does that make him a failure? I mean, the guy is, I would say, the second best guy in that weight class. He just happens to not be better than Demetrius Johnson, at least on those 2 nights that he fought him. And so in some respects, you could say, like, the guy underachieved, but not really. And so I think that's kind of the way I look at a lot of these fighters. Some of the, you know, he's a guy who I thought he's going to be a champion, and he's not been a champion.
Chad Mendes also falling in that same category.
Sure.
Even Ian McCall, who's very much in the news these days, had a lot of injuries. That and you know, you could make the argument that he defeated DJ, you know,
right, in Australia. All right, what else we got? Let's move along to our next question. What is your dream fight that never happened? Your dream fight that never happened. Does anything come to mind? Once again, I'll go first here. There was one I think that a lot of us wanted to see happen, that seemed like it was close to happening but never materialized, and that's Randy Couture versus Fedor Emelianenko. They had the poster, they did the photo shoot and all that. I think everyone at that time, and again, you have to put yourself in that era and remember how big those guys were, not in 2017, but back in 2008, 2009. That was a pretty damn big fight. And I think all of us wanted to see it. So that one comes to mind.
That was certainly the one that I thought of when I saw that, when I heard that question. And I think really prime Fedor against a top UFC guy, it always was Randy Couture. That was the guy that he was closest to. But there was always, even thoughts of some of the other guys who were, when they were in their prime as UFC heavyweight champions, like a Frank Mir, or even later on, I guess it was a little past Fedor's prime, but when Lesnar came in the picture, I mean, you think about some of those guys, it was really, Fedor competing in some other universe, some other silo, and then these UFC guys that were supposedly the best heavyweights in the world, and he was the guy that wasn't quite, he wasn't with them.
Anyone come
I
to
would
mind?
say, for me, the biggest was always, and I don't think it's going to happen now, though it's possible, but GSP Anderson Silva. I always wanted to see those two guys fight. I think that's exactly where the perfect place for super fights is you got a dominant champion, you got another dominant champion, they're close. Who is really the best? They say people, they say GSP's the ghost, they say Anderson Silva's the ghost. All right, well, the GOAT, let's find out. But GSP just was never down with the matchup. Anderson Silva wasn't 100% on board either. It just never happened, and it just felt like those two guys were really at their primes, were very dominant in their divisions, and I was curious to see who would win in a fight. But
yeah, that is a good one.
never
Remember
went
when
down.
GSP fought, I think it was Carlos Condit in Montreal, and Anderson was sitting in the front row, and they had a box in the middle of the fight showing him, so it seemed like everything was moving that direction. Right. And then, of course, Nick
there were so
Diaz.
many rumors, and people were talking about it. It was fun to think about and imagine, who would win in a fight, GSP or Anderson Silva, and it was something very possible. I mean, GSP's now challenging for the middleweight title.
Who knows?
Certainly, I think that's a great one. I guess the only other one I can think of was, it was Rousey when she was at her peak.
Yeah,
getting in the cyborg.
That was the one I was going to add.
That's I think that once we saw what happened to Rousey when she fought Holly Holm, a lot of us kind of softened our desire for that fight.
But prior to that, when Rousey was basically not thinking that she was, before Rousey was convinced that she was a boxer. When she realized that she had limitations and she used her strengths, she was unbeatable. Once she decided that she was a boxer, once Tarverdyan convinced her that she was a boxer, all bets are off. Yeah, that I mean, there was a time where I thought that could do 1.5 to 2 million pay-per-views. That was a huge fight. Okay, what else we got? Here we go. Name a fighter each for me to go on Fight Pass and binge.
Well, I mentioned earlier on George St. Pierre. I have been watching some of the promotion of the GSP Bisping fight, and I'm so uninterested in this. It doesn't seem like Bisping is a trash talker, but even he seems to be manufacturing stuff. And George can't even act serious. He's like smiling the whole time. It just seems so. The whole beef between these guys is so fake. Now, I'm not that much into fighters having beef, so unless it happens to be a really natural thing. Jones Cormier, Dillashaw, Garbrandt. I mean, those kind of things. It's like that does rev me up. But fighters don't need to generate a beef in order to make me interested. And it seems like Bisping is trying to do that with GSP, and I think it's failing. But what is getting me interested in that fight is going back and binging, GSP. So I would say, pick out some of the greatest fighters in the UFC history and just binge watch, not just...
Well, you have to pick one, so you're picking GSP.
Well, I'm picking GSP.
That's the one, UFC 65, by the way, him versus Matt Hughes, my favorite fight of all time. Really? As a fan, I remember watching it in a bar in Montreal. He won the belt.
The second one.
This is the second one, when he won the belt.
Yes.
Yeah, in Sacramento.
I would say Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz fights have always been fun. And if you looked at him when he was younger and fighting in those fight night cards, I remember they used to be on like Wednesdays.
I
remember going like after school. Yeah, after school, like looking forward to
elementary school.
Not middle school. Middle school. But yeah, Nate Diaz, and he always carried this. He still does. He's a little bit more selective who he fights now. Obviously, he won't pick up the phone for 20 million, but. Back then, he would just show up and fight anyone. I remember him fighting Joe Stevenson, Kurt Pellegrino. His fights were always fun. I'd say Nate Diaz.
I'm going to pick, so I was going to say GSP UFC 65 and then get excited for GSP's return. You took that one. So I'm going to pick BJ Penn because there was a period when he came back as a lightweight. So he fought Jens Pulver, tough finale. Then he fought Joe Stevenson. Then he fought Sean Shirk for the belt at UFC 98. And he fought Diego Sanchez at UFC 107. And there was a stretch there where truly I felt like he was the best fighter in the world. I remember sitting at the post-fight press conference in Memphis after he completely annihilated Diego Sanchez and thinking, this is the best fight in the world. It's no longer Fedor. It's not Anderson Silva. There is no one better than BJ Penn at 155 right now. And I almost kind of wished like he didn't take the GSP fight in 94 because it felt like he kind of resorted back to his old ways and he was a little lazy in training. But those fights at 155, and of course it all crumbled in Abu Dhabi, and he was never quite the same afterwards, had the one moment in Auburn Hills against Matt Hughes, 123. He was just phenomenal. I mean, that kick against Diego Sanchez that split him open on his forehead, he was amazing. So I would pick BJ.
You know, a lot of people might like remember Diego Sanchez now, but like Diego Sanchez at that time,
he was on a roll.
Killing it at welterweight, and he was dropping to 155. I believe he beat Joe Stevenson, had a really good performance, and I really thought he was going to become the next lightweight champion. He was.
Remember when he beat Sean Shirk, BJ Penn, with that flying knee up against the cage? I mean, he was
BJ Penn reinvigorated my interest in MMA. I remember watching. I did watch the first 2 or 3 or 4 UFC events, and then I kind of faded away. I wasn't working on it, so I was just a fan, and I kind of lost interest to some extent. And then I don't even know, one time I just happened to see there was a fight. I didn't even know who BJ Penn was. That's how much I wasn't paying attention. And he went out there. It was a fight where he won like in about 10 seconds. I mean, was it Uno?
Uno, yeah.
That fight. I mean, I was like watching this event, and all of a sudden I see this guy come flying across, and I was like, this guy is amazing.
Yeah.
And that totally sort of reinvigorated my interest in the sport. So I got to owe him a big debt of gratitude.
All right. What else we got? Moving along here. Describe an interesting time where you were in the minority among your peers on an MMA topic. Well, for me, this happened just last week. And let me just take this opportunity to say that I am fully aware that MMA is at times a violent and brutal sport. My point was, and I stand by this point, that as a promoter, you should not be using that word to promote your events, to put as a label on your events, because you would never see that in any other sport. The NFL would never do it, etc. That's what I was saying. I'm not trying to whitewash the sport. I'm not trying to make it PC. I'm not a snowflake. I'm not, well, maybe you may say that I am. But that was my point. And I knew that people would then take it in other directions, which is fine. I stand by it. So anyway, I saw that question and I was like, well, this just happened to me, so I would throw it out. Anything else come to mind for you guys where you feel like you were sitting on an island?
I know one.
Go ahead.
Mine would be when I was working for Sports Illustrated, and one of my duties was creating the rankings. And and I was even not even related to SI's rankings when Yahoo used to do rankings, and they had writers from all different media outlets, and there was one, who was it now? I'm trying to think who it was. One of the, who writes up in Canada, Dave Diebert, right. He raised the question, can we include Ronda Rousey in our top 10? And there was a big, disagreement back and forth, and I think he did, and I ended up doing it as well, and at some point I ended up putting Ronda Rousey as my number 1.
Wow.
And, of course, this raised a big furor because it was, people have different, pound for pound is such a nebulous thing. And the way I interpret it is, how do you do against the people in your weight class, like within your silo? How much? And in my mind, at that time when Ronda Rousey was doing what she was doing, there was nobody who was more dominant in his or her weight class than Ronda Rousey. Yeah. And so at a certain point, it was always Anderson Silva was always number 1, and then John Jones was number 2. And at some point, and GSP, and at some point, I think maybe it was Anderson Silva had lost to Weidman, and I don't remember what was going on. And she came up there, and I stuck her up there in the SI rankings, and caught hell for it. And of course, once she lost to Holly Holm, everybody's like, yeah, see, you're the guy that ranked her number 1. Well, I didn't rank her number 1 up. She lost to Holly Holm. I ranked her number 1 when she was winning 3 fights, within 30 seconds each. And so that was one of the places where I definitely got a lot of grief. And, you know, it was over something that was basically a fantasy world anyway. You know, who knows what pound for pound really is.
I do maintain, though, that men and women should have separate pound for pound rankings because I feel like...
Why?
I don't know. It just feels like they're fighting against...
They're not fighting... Like, why would you rank Demetrius Johnson against... How can you rank Stipe Miocic and Demetrius Johnson?
No, but if that's the case, why isn't Amanda Nunes in the male bantamweight division rankings?
It's because it's a different... She's in a different weight class. I mean, she's in a different weight... She's in a different division.
I just feel like they're two separate entities.
Well, of course, in real rankings, of course, there are women's bantamweights and there are men's bantamweights. But when you're doing pound for pound, all you're doing is comparing people.
And also, like in tennis and golf, you don't mix them. You know, they're separate.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's
I see your point.
Anyway,
yeah.
Anything come to mind for you?
But this was before I was like working as media. But I remember clearly like a while. Before the UFC opened the flyweight division, I'm like, yo, there needs to be a flyweight division. I would just see as a fan that other promotions had 125-pound weight class. And I would just look at Joseph Benavidez, Demetrius Johnson. Like, there was a clear moment where I saw Demetrius Johnson fight Dominic Cruz. And like, Demetrius Johnson came up short, but I was like, you know, Dominic Cruz is a lot bigger. You know, if these guys were the same size, I don't know if it'd be a complete different story, but... there's clearly a big size, difference there, and a lot of people would tell me like, nah, there's no adult male that would ever weigh 125 pounds, and as a small guy myself, I'm like, nah, trust me, there is.
And you were right.
So yeah, but that division, I don't know, it's in jeopardy, could be.
No,
who knows?
No.
But there was they ended up opening that division, and Demetrius Johnson went on to go down and.
Yeah, vindicated. Okay, what else we got? Are you surprised there has been no activism from UFC athletes in comparison to NFL/NBA, and would you expect any fighter to do something? You guys surprised by that?
Well,
this is in regards to, the national anthem stuff and some of the things going on in politics. I mean, for the most part, no one has got on the mic. No one has said anything about, our current president. No one has said anything about the flag. No one has said anything about race. No one has used their platform, correct me if I'm wrong, to a great degree in MMA right now to speak about these things. Are you surprised?
I guess I'm surprised that nobody has done it, and I correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, it's possible that somebody has, and I'm not noticing it.
Not on a UFC scale, right?
Yeah, I'm surprised that there's not been a voice. I'm not surprised at all that we haven't had this big uprising. I mean, I think that like in the NFL, where there's a lot of athletes who are participating, it's not something I would have expected out of fighters, but yeah.
A little surprised that no fighter has ever gone on the mic and said, screw you, President Trump, something like that. I remember.
Well, we had what's his name? Who was it? Was it we had someone who was saying I'd like to go fight Obama. I mean, what was his name?
Well, no, in an interview with me, Jacob Volkman backstage said that he wanted to go beat up Barack Obama, and that got us on the Tonight Show.
Right.
Jay Leno used it. It was a great moment.
Right.
Of course, they didn't credit us. But so no one is.
So if everybody, why would someone want to, not, fight Obama, but nobody wants to fight Trump?
Well, it hasn't come up. Maybe we need to drag Jacob Volkman back.
I feel like we see the opposite. A lot of people supporting Trump.
But we haven't really seen anyone. Basically, the point is like no one has really weighed in. And I guess there's a lot going on, and they're in fights, and they're trying to advance their careers. But I would say I'm mildly surprised that no one has even gone off. I mean, we've asked fighters their opinion on certain things for
one thing, this sport has
stayed in their lane.
The percentage of the athletes in this sport, as opposed to say the NFL, who are African American, and that's the population that is most affected by the whole point of the anthem protests has been the treatment of black people and all people of color by police and really by authority in general. And so because there's a smaller representation in MMA, that's not to say that it's just people of color who are and should be protesting, but it seems as though because of a smaller representation, there's probably a larger group of more conservative people. I mean, I'm not really sure all of it, but I would say that because of that, it's a little bit different population who are
I guess
populate the athletes.
Also, the national anthem's not really played.
No, but just that they were using the platform to speak.
I mean,
like the post-fight interviews. I'm surprised somebody hasn't said something.
Also, their platforms are a lot smaller. But for example, Kevin Lee in Media Lunch talked about it. He's like, "Oh, I wish my platform was that big so I can speak on
about
these
LeBron
issues."
James. That's a good point.
You know, if you have a very small platform and you're in a point of your career where
but at that point, just screw that. Just talk. You know, and you don't know what's going to happen. We are running out of time, so let's quickly move along to our next question here. What do we have? Quickly, what are your thoughts on The Ultimate Fighter? Redemption felt way more interesting than this year's Crown of Champ season. Are you watching?
You know what? It's funny. I usually, when there's a Crown of Champ season, I do watch, and I'm not going to say that I have no interest in it, but I have not been watching. I've been keeping up on
the ratings.
I've been reading about it a little bit, but I haven't been watching.
Almost hit rock bottom. What do you think?
Yeah, I haven't been tuning in.
No.
Really, the only Ultimate Fighter I tune in at this point is the Latin America one. That draws my interest.
That's the one you watch?
Yeah.
When was the last one?
It's been
a while, right?
The third one, it was last year.
Okay.
That's where they had Martin Bravo on that. Yeah, I guess, you know, because I'm Spanish, there's appeal to it. And, you know, all these fighters come from Latin American countries, usually lower income. So they have, like, wild, crazy stories behind that. I feel like the Ultimate Fighter, at least the American version, has, like, stalled a little bit.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what happens to it once they sign the new TV deal. Because they can't get rid of it yet. I also would strongly argue that the best fighters at 125 aren't in that house. You know, like a Valentina Shevchenko, once she moves down.
And why would
Jennifer Maia and Invicta.
We've also talked about the, you know, is it really going to, even if all the best fighters were in the house, would the format of that really bring out the best champion? No, it's going to bring out the person who was able to cut weight several times and live in a house with a bunch of people who you're competing against. Like, it really puts these, in this case, the women, in other case, some of the men, it puts them in a situation that is not anything like what their fighting careers are going to be like. So that's part of the reason why I get a little bit less, I don't get as excited by it.
And they're on back to back. It's just a lot to watch. Okay, what else we got? Here we go. Biggest question of the day. Is oatmeal a breakfast soup?
What kind of dumb question is that? Of course it's not a soup.
It's something else.
Is cereal with milk in it, is that a soup?
I guess that's a better question, right?
I mean, come on, oatmeal's oatmeal. It's food. You guys are going to have to do a little bit better than this wacky...
Wait a second.
We call for wacky questions and that's what we get?
But you kind of blew my mind with the cereal thing. Is that soup?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't think so, no.
Because cereal, it's like the box of cereal, but cereal with milk together, is that a soup? Yeah.
No, because like there's like a soup is, first of all, right? Like it has different ingredients. It has to be.
Yeah, so does cereal.
No, you don't. You just put milk in a bowl and then put the cereal over.
Yeah, but what is in the cereal? A bunch of different ingredients.
Right.
It's not just
but it's like a solid. It's like, for example, if I grab just cold
chicken
water.
Chicken soup is chicken
but
in
you
water.
actually have to, you know, make it. There's like a process behind it. You know.
So
what
basically,
I'm
we're saying.
So if I were to grab water and then just put potatoes in it.
Yeah.
Is that a soup?
Potato soup.
Or is that just potatoes inside a bowl of water?
Could be soup.
That's the big question.
It's not a soup. A
But
soup is elaborate.
Oatmeal is absolutely. It's half the word is meal, so it's not soup is not a meal.
That's true.
Anybody who watched Seinfeld knows that soup is not a meal.
The big debate is our hot dog sandwiches. Have you ever heard someone debate, is oatmeal a meal or a soup?
No. And hot dogs is its own category.
It's not a sandwich.
It's definitely not a sandwich.
I would never call it a sandwich, but I guess it technically qualifies. It's something in between some bread. So I guess
but the bread doesn't open fully. It's kind of like a half.
Well,
that's why
so is a wrap a sandwich?
But that does open, because it's like open and then you close it.
Yeah.
So oatmeal, no. All right.
No.
Okay.
Not.
I'm glad we cleared that up.
Yeah.
Bottom line is, my question is to all you people out there. Next week, you're going to come up with better questions than this.
All right. So the challenge has been made.
Really? Come on.
Jeff Wagenheim is unimpressed.
The
with
MMA
your
questions are pretty good, but those are not interesting to me. I mean, that's
you want the wacky.
After the beat, it's got to have like good questions.
Look, I was looking for questions.
Has Chuck Mindenhall ever been seen without a hat? That was a good question.
That was a good question. All right. So step up your game.
Yeah.
Okay. On that note, we shall say goodbye. Appreciate everyone watching The Beat. After The Beat, enjoy the fights this weekend. Bellator on Friday, UFC on Saturday. We're taking a break until next week. We're back next week, so it's a pretty good stretch that we're on these days, right?
Yeah.
I like it. Okay. Thank you again for Jeff, for Danny. I'm Mario, for the rest of the crew. Again, thanks so much for watching. Enjoy the fights this weekend, and of course, enjoy your weekend as well.